Welcome to Impostrix Podcast, where we affirm the lived experiences of professionals of color who navigate imposter syndrome and racial toxicity at work. The tools that you learn here will help you confidently address racial toxicity at work, put that imposter syndrome to the side, stand in your power, and resist racial gaslighting. I'm your host, Whitney Knox-Lee, a Black mother to Black boy children, a civil rights attorney, and an anti-racism educator and trainer. If this is your first time listening, welcome. We're glad you're here. Episodes are published every week. Make sure you go back and listen to our past episodes. All right, here we go. Okay, y'all. Today's episode is going to be a little non-traditional because I'm going to be talking about myself. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about a recent period of anxiety that I experienced. I think it's important for us, particularly for Black women, but others as well, to talk about mental health and mental wellness. And what better platform than on my podcast? So, what I want to share today is in a situation that I experienced just a couple of weeks ago at the beginning of August when I essentially had some kind of anxiety crisis. I don't think it was a panic attack. I don't really know the right words to call it. All I know is that I eventually talked to my therapist and she said I was suffering from anxiety. So here's what happened. Life was happening. Life did not happen any differently than it usually happens. But in my life, because if you recall from a couple of episodes ago when I did, I think it was episode 4 or episode 3, when I talked about the types of imposter syndrome, I talked about the superhuman or the super person type of imposter syndrome. And this is where those of us, and I think Black women, you should be very familiar with this. We think that we can do everything all the time, that we can do everything at 100%, that we are going to be successful in everything. These are the expectations that we have of ourselves and the expectation that other people have of us. So I very much live within that expectation. And at the point where I forget to do something or drop a ball or don't do something as great as I want to do it, then I start talking to myself about how horrible I am, how I'm an imposter. I start doubting myself, and it can quickly turn into a spiral. So on this particular occurrence, I was dealing with many things. There was stuff going on in the house. We had a leak in one of our rooms that caused mold damage. We had trees that had fallen outside because storms keep hitting Georgia. We had a leaking refrigerator, a leaking dishwasher. My kid had just started kindergarten, and so that transition turned out to be more difficult for me than I anticipated. And work was picking up in that I was traveling for work much more than I ordinarily travel. The other thing that was going on was I launched a podcast, of course. As you know, since you're listening, thank you for listening. But I launched a podcast and my hours have changed in terms of when I'm working on the podcast versus when I'm working on work versus when I'm parenting. Versus when I'm being a wife and doing all of the things. And so I really fell out of a routine of doing the things that I need to do to take care of myself. So those things include taking my medication, going to bed by 10:30 every night, some prayer and meditation, attending my recovery meetings because I am somebody that's in long-term sobriety. And just doing some of these things that I had been doing regularly that was really working for me, but that I essentially kind of put on the back burner as I've been trying to start this new project in addition to juggle everything else. Okay, so what happened was the leak that happened in the bathroom behind me resulted, I think, in the tile of the shower the grout in the tile becoming shattered looking. I have this thing where the pattern of something being shattered really bothers me, to the extent that my skin starts crawling, I get itchy, things start twitching. It's very, very uncomfortable for me. Usually when this happens, I remove myself from the situation. I have to stop thinking about it. And at the point where I've kind of been away from the situation for a little bit, it goes away. Well, this was happening in my home. It was something that I needed to take care of in terms of contacting insurance, getting contractors, taking pictures, etc., etc. For some reason, this triggered for me. It was like the straw that broke the camel's back. It triggered for me this full-blown situation where I could not think about anything other than how much my skin itched. I could not get comfortable no matter what clothes that I was wearing. In hindsight, I realized that my speech had really changed. I was talking much more rapidly than usual. My heart was beating. I was getting dizzy, like just bouts of dizziness, not like all the time dizzy. And I was irritable. A bunch of these things were happening. I laugh at myself now because I consulted with Dr. Google. What Dr. Google told me is that I was having tactile hallucinations. Now, Dr. Google also said that people who have tactile hallucinations are people who are experiencing symptoms of schizophrenia. They're people who are taking large quantities of cocaine. They are people who are in active alcoholism, who are drinking a lot and maybe detoxing from alcohol or from another substance. Even though none of these things applied to me, I was convinced that I had tactile hallucinations. So what did I do? I reached out to my sister circle. You're familiar with them because they were on episodes 1 and 2 of this show. As you know, 2 people in my sister circle are in the mental health world profession. They responded to me basically not saying that I'm not having tactile hallucinations, but instead being like, hey, Whitney, I think you've got a sensory issue. Hey, Whitney, what are some self-care things that you can do? One of them called me up and was like, so Whitney, work is going to have to wait today. Tell me what's going on. And I explained all of this to her, and she was like, okay, I'm going to tell you what I do when I'm experiencing this type of situation. And specifically for her, it was insomnia. She recently realized that her insomnia was due to anxiety. So she walked me through a number of self-care exercises that I can do. And she started by asking me, what can I do? What do I do in my daily routine that makes my skin feel good? And the first thing that I thought of was putting on lotion. Now, I am not a body person. I'm not a somatic person. I'm not in tune with all of those things. I'm very logic-brained. If I have an issue, then I go back and I look at the things that have happened, but I'm not really thinking about my body. So at this point, it was not clear to me that I was having a mental health crisis that was affecting my body physically. So we talked about putting on lotion. She suggested that I wear something soft or have my skin up against something soft. She suggests that I take a break from work. And I mean, just like, 15 minutes or so. She suggested that, I focus on this right now, do what I need to do to get comfortable, and then return to work when I'm ready. We talked about scent and smell and what smells calm me down. And so I was thinking about like lavender and the candles that I have. So she encouraged me to light a candle. We talked about sound and whether or not different sound frequencies help me. And I don't know if they do or not, but I do know that I've been listening to this app recently called Neutrozen, that is similar to the Calm app. It doesn't have like meditations, if you will, but what it does have is various music frequencies or sound frequencies that are created to help you sleep better, for example, or relieve some anxiety or relieve stress. And I believe that the owner or the creator does actually create meditations for you, but I haven't done that yet. I'll actually put a link to this app in the show notes because I really like it and I recommend it. So we talked about that. We talked about, what I was eating and drinking, and had I had any water. We talked about a number of things that day I did because basically I was desperate. Like, if you would have told me the week before, Whitney, go put a soft blanket on your skin, I would have been like, but why? But I was desperate. So she also suggested that I speak to my therapist. Lucky for me, I had a therapy appointment that night. I am somebody that goes to therapy. I believe in therapy. I benefit from therapy. And right now I have a therapist. So I do all these things. I start feeling a little bit better. That's great. When I go and talk to my therapist, though, what she identifies for me is not that I'm having tactile hallucinations, but instead that I'm experiencing anxiety, and specifically that I'm experiencing physical symptoms of anxiety. And when I tell you, I had a really difficult time believing her. I was much more ready to believe that I was having tactile hallucinations than I was anxiety. But then I thought about all of the things that I had been experiencing recently, all of the red flags. So, for example, one of them was I had been up until 2:30 a couple of nights before, re-editing a podcast episode that I had already edited months before. I listened to the episode. I didn't like it. I thought I could make it more perfect. And so I stayed up until, I kid you not, 2:30 in the morning. I went to sleep that night because my husband woke up for a midnight snack, saw me awake, and sat on the couch behind me looking at me like I was crazy until I got uncomfortable enough to get up. So, red flag number one, I'm working very, very late into the night, thinking that I can make something perfect, driving myself absolutely crazy. But the other things that I was experiencing are the rapid breathing. My skin was hot, so I was sweating a lot. I was having dizziness, which I thought was vertigo. I couldn't concentrate on anything other than how my skin was physically feeling or how I was going to get the situation with the leak fixed, like ASAP. I was irritable. I was restless, and I had trouble sleeping. I had had gastrointestinal problems. And when I went and looked at the signs of anxiety, all of these signs are experiences that people have when they're suffering from anxiety. And I just didn't know, because for me, anxiety has typically shown up as like, yes, racing thoughts, but really more so like an obsession over a worry that I have. And not so much like I've never recognized it in how I feel physically. Now, in hindsight, I know that the vertigo that I've been diagnosed with maybe 10 years ago, that I went to a number of doctors about, that I went to an allergist and got on sinus medication for, that I went to a physical therapist and did physical therapy around the equilibrium of my ears or whatever. The vertigo is really dizziness, and it's stress and anxiety related. How do I know this? I had to go into that room to take photographs for insurance. And the moment that I walked into that room, I got dizzy. And then I had to go back and I Googled dizziness because I couldn't even identify that what I was feeling was dizzy. And I certainly couldn't identify that dizziness was a sign or a symptom that people can experience when they're feeling highly anxious. The other thing that my therapist pointed out to me is that I was off of my medication. When I had my first child 6 years ago, experienced postpartum depression. I took an antidepressant slash anxiety medication for that, and basically just continued through my next pregnancy. And I've stayed on it. And I've stayed on it because, I mean, it's been working for me. Like, I don't have any problems with it. I don't have any negative side effects. So I'm kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But what happened as I had gotten out of my routine, including my evening routine, I had gotten out of the routine of taking my medications. And then, even though I was taking my medications every now and then, I eventually ran out. And I had been out of that medication for 2 weeks. And now I'm having this full-blown anxiety situation. So for me, what I really learned about myself is, one, I actually do have anxiety. Like, I wasn't really quite sure that I did. I wasn't trying to test the notion of me having anxiety or not. But I have anxiety. And furthermore, my anxiety does show up in my body if only I open my mouth and talk to somebody about it, instead of keeping it to myself, trying to deal with it myself, trying to diagnose myself with tactile hallucination, because it really did take other people having input. And this is the type of thing where, like, yeah, it made me really uncomfortable, and it lasted for multiple days, which is why I ultimately did open my mouth and talk to people about. But usually when this happens, it's only happening for like a day, and it will have come and gone without me really spending this much time on it. So I would have never told anybody. The dizziness, I absolutely did tell people about because it was worrisome to me. But even then, I don't remember ever being asked about anxiety or stress, because I'm realizing that I really had no idea how to identify anxiety in myself. So I'm sharing this experience not for, I don't know, pity or even support or anything like that. I'm sharing it with you because I want you to know that if you're experiencing something similar, that it's worth talking to somebody about, and not even a professional. Like, even just friends, even your partner. My therapist told me, she was like, so there is this phobia, but don't Google it now because it will freak you out. But there is this phobia, it's called trypophobia. And it is commonly referred to as like the fear of holes, and specifically like groupings of holes. So think of like a honeycomb. Evidently, there are people who get very freaked out and uncomfortable when they see these holes. And now that I'm feeling a little bit better, I did Google it to find out that it's not just holes. It can also be small clusters of bumps or patterns. So again, here I am with Dr. Google telling me, okay, what I have is trypophobia. I don't know if that's actually what I have, but if you're familiar with it, I feel like this is the most similar thing to what I'm experiencing, is this pattern that does not sit well with me. And it causes me severe itching, shaking. It's a very visual thing. I don't have to touch it. I don't have to do any, all I have to do is see it. And then it like triggers in me this response. And what happened was, being triggered with that, plus all the other stuff that was going on, plus not being on the medication that I had been on for 5 years, really just caused me to have this spiral. And I think how it relates to imposter syndrome is, again, because of how I deal with imposter syndrome, or how I experience it, is this needing to be perfect in everything and needing to juggle all of the balls. And the moment that a ball drops, like, all of a sudden I ain't good for shit, you know? So I am just so grateful that I utilized the resources that I had available to me. I highly suggest that if you're someone who thinks that you're experiencing a mental health issue, that you utilize the resources that are available. And I recently posted on Instagram about types of resources. And so this can be everything from a therapist or a psychiatrist or your friends, but it can also be meditation or prayer, but it can be journaling. It can be reaching out to your employee assistance program if you have one at work where you can get 3 to 5 free counseling sessions that can help you through some of these issues. It can be talking to a mentor or talking to a sponsor or talking to a parent. And then the one thing that really came up for me was this like intuition and really taking a moment to listen to what my body was saying. I had no other choice but to listen to my body. And my body started speaking so loud that I couldn't ignore it. And I had to tell somebody about it. I did, after realizing all of these things, after realizing that the bathroom was triggering me, I had my husband take over dealing with all of that stuff so that I didn't have to look at it. And it sounds weird, like it sounds really weird as I'm saying it. But I can just imagine that I'm not the only one. If I'm the only one, okay, all right, I got issues. But I just imagine that there are other people out there who are listening, maybe you, who have experienced something similar. I'm just so grateful to have the insight now and the wherewithal of what certain triggers are and what certain symptoms are. That the dizziness, if I start feeling dizzy, am I feeling overly stressed? Am I feeling anxious about something? And am I doing the self-care? Because I don't know about you, but for me, self-care has really looked like a once a month or once a quarter massage, or spending money to get my nails done, or going out with the girls for a dinner. It always looks like something that means I'm spending money, and it's like a special event. What can I do to make self-care be a daily thing, a daily ritual that does not cost me money and that does not mean taking 2 hours out of my day, because that's not realistic for a working mom like me. So what are the things that I can do on a daily basis that I can put into my routine? So here's what I've established for myself. Taking some extra time to put lotion on in the morning. Listening to sounds that help me. Smelling scents that help me. So lighting my candles. Or if I'm at work, I have a diffuser at work. So turning on the diffuser and putting some lavender in there. I really like lavender. Drinking tea. Here's a God shot for you. The day that all of this was happening, that like it all came to a head and I had all these conversations and it clicked that it was anxiety, one of my best friends, Sasha, who lives out in Oregon. Hey, Sasha, I love you, girl. She sent me my favorite tea from this place. Oh gosh, what's the name of it? It's my absolute favorite tea. Chesser is what it's called. And I'll put a link for that too, because I love it and I turn everybody onto it. She had bought me this tea care package to celebrate the launch of the podcast. But because they were waiting on a leaf to come in, because these are people who like mix their own teas. They were waiting on a leaf to come in, so the order came late. The order arrived on this day. So I got off the phone with my therapist. I went downstairs. There was a box of teas. One of them was a root chakra tea. I don't know nothing about no chakras. I'm not going to pretend like I do, but I read the package and root chakra has something to do with skin. I don't know. But I drank that tea and it did help me. So that was just a God moment for me. But anyways, so drinking teas. I'm also drinking a magnesium supplement. It's called Calm, and it helps with sleep. So I'm doing these things now. Also, I'm back on my medication, thank God. And then I'm also actively trying not to live in my perfectionism and not to live in my superwomanism. I'm trying to delegate tasks, let other people do things, ask for help when I need help, take a step back when I need to take a step back and not feel guilty about it, but instead consider it an act of self-love and consider imperfection an act of self-care. I'm trying to do all these things so that my journey to do all of these things that I want to do can be a sustainable journey, because it can't be sustainable if I'm fizzling out. And a couple of weeks ago, I was fizzling out. I was not going to be able to do work that day. So look, the other thing that I want to share with you is that if you are somebody who deals with mental health issues and you don't know where to turn, you can call the Suicide Prevention Hotline, which is the numbers 988, and you can speak to someone on that hotline. There's also a text crisis line. That line is also open 24 hours a day. That line is 741-741, and you will text the word home, and you will be connected with a trained crisis counselor. Calling 988 or texting 741-741 is free. You can do it anytime. You can do it privately. I encourage you to use these resources because, look, we're amazing. And sometimes we take on too much, or sometimes we're dealing with hormones or chemical imbalances or whatever the case may be, and we need some help, and that's okay. So while it's okay to have these things going on, this is not where we're going to remain. This is not where we're going to stay. And in order to move on from these experiences, we have to actually take some action to address them. Okay, so we're not going to stay here. We're going to keep moving forward. I know this was a weird episode. I hope it meant something to you. It means something to me to just share my story. Next week, we're going to get real back on topic, and I'm going to have a guest. We're going to be talking about imposter syndrome again and transition into racial toxicity. So I look forward to having you back for that episode. Thanks for showing up. If you like this episode, don't forget to support Impostrix Podcast. You can do that by signing up for my newsletter, following me, liking the content on social media. You can find out all the things on www.impostrixpodcast.com. And there's also merchandise now available. If you want to buy a sticker or a t-shirt, go to the website. I'll post a link below. You'll be able to find it. All right, y'all. Be validated. Until next time. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to listen to past episodes and to subscribe. You can do that by pressing the little bell on your screen. You can also follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at Impostrix Podcast. I'm also on LinkedIn. And you can search me by just using my name, Whitney Knox Lee. I'm also on TikTok at Impostrix Pod, and I'm now on Threads at Impostrix Podcast. Also, feel free to leave me a message. I want to know what you think about this show. So you can do that by leaving a review, or you can do that by sending me an email at impostrixpodcast@gmail.com. This podcast is for me, and this podcast is for you. And I hope that you're leaving this podcast and this experience feeling validated, because that's the goal. Be validated. Until next time.